Hello and welcome everyone. This is Mr. Lauren with Reading is Fantastical. Hey, and we have a great guest for you today. We have a clinical psychiatrist who specializes in working with kids with autism. Isn't that something? That is a treat. So let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Todd Levine. If you can introduce yourself, Dr. Levine.
Sure. So I am a child psychiatrist and I work mostly with children with autism. We call it outpatient setting. So kids are coming to my office on a regular basis. And I work on behavior issues and development. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how kids on the spectrum learn and integrate information for sure.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So when dealing with young people with behavioral issues, do you think that could impede or kind of restrict or delay their ability to read or perhaps have enthusiasm for reading? Could that be a hindrance?
Yeah, and I think for me, I mean, a hindrance, I would say it's more of it depends on the context. So I would say, many kids that I treat are actually quite interested in reading
Mhm.
and learning information. They might not be able to speak to and join in a conversation, but they are interested in gathering information visually from places, including reading. The tricky part, I think, for like for I guess for lack of a better term, a traditional reading situation is engagement, because reading is part decoding, meaning understanding words and reading, but it's also bonding, right? So I think most of us as adults reading to children and children being read to find it to be a joining bonding experience.
Okay.
And that might be a struggle for some kids on the spectrum who aren't as enthusiastic about spending personal time together and in a reciprocal way. Now, that's being a little stereotypic because my belief and my observations that children with autism are incredibly enthusiastic about engagement, but how we go about it is different. So um, I think sometimes it might be hard for someone on the spectrum to sit and listen to a story that is read to them in a traditional way. And I think there's a lot of patience involved in finding stories that may appeal to their preferred interests. So a lot of kids on the spectrum have strong interests in certain things. So maybe it is something, a topic on which they are quite interested. Maybe it's, and we talked about this a little bit, Lauren, Minecraft is a popular one. I'm
Right.
using that as an example. It could
Yes.
be airplanes, it could be construction vehicles and things like that too. So I think when I read with younger children, I always think the main goal of reading with very young children is for them to hear the information and follow along too. And
Yes.
so I think that's very doable with someone on the spectrum, but it might be you might be using different types of books and different stimuli and having different expectations for attention, perhaps, than you would with someone who's not on the spectrum.
Okay, great, great. Now, obviously, this particular podcast is not used for any sort of treatment for anyone. So, obviously, someone who's gleaning information for their particular situation, they need to talk to their doctor and go through that process, obviously. So, but one of the main reasons why I even brought this up and even reached out to, so once again, thank you, Dr. Levine. It's just I received a message from one of our parents asking me if this channel is geared towards children that is ODD, she mentions, and high spectrum of autism. She says she has a 4-year-old grandson that had behavioral issues and is about to be put out of daycare. And so,
Mhm.
because of this particular program, I obviously am reading to kids. So she felt that this may be a way to connect perhaps with her child and also to help him so that this program doesn't put him out and that he's not being delayed because of his learning or what have you. So that's kind of the way I didn't really know how to approach it, but I wanted to just reach out to you. And so, for those who are not familiar with you, can you give us a brief background as to your education? And so
Mhm.
that way people can kind of know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I trained in a program that was both for pediatrics and child psychiatry, and
Mhm.
so I spent the vast majority of my training working with children. And I also happened to land at a program that had an incredibly um, vibrant autism psychiatric treatment community as well, both outpatient, meaning in offices and as well as in the hospital. So I had um, often the pleasure and sometimes the frustration with trying to engage children who aren't necessarily interested in being engaged. And
Gotcha.
so while certainly the frustration that is felt is real, I think the way I think about autism is it's still living, right? So all the same rules apply in terms of um, trying to engage, trying to be with, but also being mindful of the fact that they still might have trouble sitting still. They still might not be interested in what you're offering as well. And trial and error, right? So it could be
Mhm.
content based. I know certain kids who will read. I've known some kids on the spectrum who have read well before it was I would say developmentally appropriate, meaning they have kids reading at 1 or 2 years of age for real, which is
Wow.
very advanced, right, in terms of
Yes.
time. So when I think of reading, they can often decode and understand language, but also what it feels like as a parent, what we really, or anyone reading to children, is we want to feel connected to a shared story. So sometimes kids on the spectrum have difficulties with what we call joint attention, which is if I read something to them and we both look at the picture, look at the pages, we would not expect, but be hoping that a child would be like pointing to the picture, oh, look at that, isn't that cool? And oh yeah, I like that part. There might not be the same type of feedback for someone on the spectrum too. It doesn't mean they're not listening, but it might feel different in terms of
Mhm.
participation too. And they might also just say, like any kid would say, like, give me the book, let me read it. So
Mhm.
that's a possibility. Not all, usually young children like to be read too as part of the fun. So when you have an animated voice and wonderful pictures and time to put into it, I think it's can be wonderful. But being patient, right? So it might not be the right book, or this one didn't quite work out, or maybe this is not the right time. Maybe they need some alone time as well, too. Not terribly different than kids who aren't on the spectrum, but I think it's more magnified with kids on the spectrum.
So obviously
So
being a
yeah. So I mean, don't be discouraged if it doesn't work out the first 25 times. And I mean that sincerely. Like
right.
people, parents that have children on the spectrum know that they're trying many, many, many more times for that engagement and getting creative, right? Maybe it's in the right topic, maybe the wrong time of day, maybe they need a blanket, maybe they need a snack, all
Mhm.
those things that we would do, but you might have to put more time into finding that formula that works so they can sit with you and you can and enjoy it. I mean, for me, reading is about a shared experience and bonding,
Yes.
attachment. So, and of course, kids on the spectrum may have trouble with attachment, meaning finding, finding a space to be with others, especially parental figures and things. And so,
Yes.
often a difficult time. So it's a challenge for sure.
Absolutely. So you mentioned about obviously being flexible because when I interviewed another parent, she mentioned that she had to try different things, different methods. There was a safe space on the child's bed, and it made like a little teepee. So they would go into the teepee and read inside there. That was a reading time. And that they had a library in there. And so the child would just go ahead and pick, obviously, just like we would do just for our own kids. And so
Hmm.
pick a book or whatever they feel like reading. So whenever they felt like reading, that was the time. But it had for her household, they had a designated time, 8 o'clock. They knew that before they went to bed, that was
Hmm.
reading time. And
Hmm.
so, and also she treated it as a way for as a reward as well. So those are two different things that she used, but those are just with her. But she had an older child and a younger one, and they had
Hmm.
different methods. So she had one method for the older one, and a completely different one for the younger one. So it was
Hmm.
like, and I guess it's just being a parent too, knowing your kids,
Hmm.
knowing when they're open and available to receive that information. But you're
Hmm.
absolutely right. So just being flexible seems to be the key.
Yeah. Also, I have a memory of reading to my daughter, and she was a very voracious reader and still
Mhm.
is as a teenager, but I was reading Harry Potter to her, and then at some point she said, "I'll take over, Dad," and started reading the book for me. And it's like she was reading to me, which is totally also part of the fun. Now, for younger children, kids on the spectrum, that'd be a less likely thing. But I do think thinking about what is a shared reading experience and a personal reading experience are important.
Mm,
So there might be some topics that, like any of us, I just want to read this book to myself
right,
versus I want to read it with you as father, grandfather, uncle, aunt, teacher,
right.
librarian, whoever it may be, too.
Yeah. Because I know with my own daughter, it kind of started that way that I just started her just pointing out different things in the house. just so we can establish that connection. Then I'm going to say this word, you repeat it back, and that type thing. Then we kind of advance that over to the library, and she would pick out whatever book I would read, and she would kind of follow along. She would kind of recite some of the words back, not necessarily memorizing it, but just kind of paying attention to what I'm saying and pointing to the different pictures. Did it with her kindergarten class, and some of the same responses from the kids who are perhaps a new mom. So that's kind of one of the main reasons why I even started the channel.
Mhm.
So I just noticed that that response by getting involved, getting the parents when everything was someone's time to read, all Blackberries, all phones, all TVs, everything is off. And so that's kind of also wanted to provide some sort of alternative to putting a laptop or putting a tablet with games in front of a kid as a babysitter. So that's one
Mhm.
of the main reasons that I kind of started this, so that they can have an alternative to listening to reading, getting involved, developing a love for that. But when that parent contacted me, I said, I need to reach out to someone who's an expert to see if there's some sort of bridge that can kind of help
Mhm.
to that parent to establish that bond. So hopefully it doesn't, perhaps create a delay for the child and perhaps create something that the child would go ahead and use going forward.
Yeah. And the bridge is emotional, right? And so
Mhm.
I think that the logistics of reading, we kind of know how to, we as adults know how to read to children. But so when you mentioned your daughter pointing to things and your daughter saying those words too, it's interesting because when I'm working with kids on the spectrum, and I had this conversation a few times today at my work, that the encouragement for them to speak is also based upon parent initiative. So many kids on the spectrum don't necessarily want to speak, and it's not
Mm.
that their vocal cords don't work or their language function, their brains don't work, but we take for granted that sometimes that we know intuitively, maybe as non-autistic people, that speaking to somebody about our needs will get those needs met. And we communicate verbally as a way of joining. And so sometimes I think the would that child find reading to be engaging? Maybe they find it intrusive too, and maybe
Mm.
reading in a traditional way is less successful. And there is, I think, beyond autism, the draw to electronics and other devices is hard to break, right? So you have to. So I think as a parent or a reader
Mhm.
joining with children in reading, it's become, now granted, when I was a kid, there was TV, so, right, video games, Atari I had back in the day,
Sure.
so I want to
Sorry.
read. But I think engagement and putting aside time just for reading has become more of a challenge in a
Mm.
societal way too.
Right, right, right.
But I
So
would, yeah,
go
so
ahead.
forced reading, I would say, can be rough, right? So you're going to sit and listen to this story, then nobody's happy, right? Neither the reader nor the listener are happy, right? So that's the part. So I love, so routine can be helpful too for
Mhm.
autism,
Mhm.
but it can also be a struggle too. So I think our traditions, I'm thinking just general, if there is such a thing, American like bedtime routines usually involve a shower, a bath, brushing your teeth, and then reading time has become, that seems to be the time we read, right? We don't
Right.
read in the mornings when everyone's a thousand things and like two kids get to school, two parents get to work, it seems to be rough. So we find reading to be a relaxation exercise as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
And um, finding the right timing is hard, I
Right.
think for
Right.
some kids, but the kids on the spectrum who might not find that to be as relaxing as well. Um, and also, we get creative. Um, I used to read stories to my daughter off the iPad because I get ebooks, right?
Mhm.
So while it seems, interesting, like, but I literally, there's some books I couldn't have a physical copy of, and it was
Sure.
like an
Sure.
old copy of Pinocchio, like
Mhm.
the original ones translated from Italian before the Disney version.
Sure.
And so I said, look, I'm going to read on the electronics, even though I was kind of not too happy about it, it didn't feel as genuine, it worked,
Mhm.
right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
what if the electronic becomes the reading device? And, I guess these are the types of creativity that form that relationship in reading.
So,
So,
but you mentioned Minecraft as a kind of a toy-ish or a technique or some sort of device that's challenging that might be encouraging to our young people. Is there So you mentioned that. So kind of elaborate on the Minecraft
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Yeah. So Minecraft is actually a video game
Mm.
that sounds counterintuitive to say, well, we read about a video game. However,
Right.
uh, but so I'm thinking about, and this is not just autism, there are many kids who, and every family has to make their own decisions about electronics too and how it
Mhm.
fits into the day and
Sure.
how often and how much you use it. But there are some kids who really get into Minecraft, which has basically it's a very, um, I guess, lack of a term, more archaic, kind of primitive graphic of like blocks building, right?
Hmm.
And basically, you have this canvas of basically stones and grass and other materials that you can build and create. So you can dig holes and mines and build a tower, a pool. Like it's amazing what you can do on it. So there are those that have, you don't want to play Minecraft all the time, but they do have books about Minecraft as
Right.
well. So in some ways, it's not, I wouldn't, I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is a little trickery, but it's not really what I mean. What I mean is sometimes you have to invest in the specific interest of the child on the spectrum. And I'm
Right.
using Minecraft as an example
Hmm.
and say, okay, we can do Minecraft, but we're going to read a book about it. We're not going to play it, you know?
Right.
Um, and there, I'm sure there's, nowadays, um, people are publishing books on their own, all over the place too. So you can find, it used to be you'd have to go to a library or a bookstore or something like that. Now I could, there's things called fan fiction now, which kids read, which is basically taking a topic, say Harry Potter, and then they'll read the materials of other people who intermix, Harry Potter with another story, and they build their
Yes.
own plot lines
Right.
too. So I've had a lot of kids on the spectrum who are avid readers. I'm talking about older kids that are a bit more
Mhm.
verbal, engaging in the writing as well as the reading too. And so
Right.
their subject matter can vary. Like any other child, but still, I notice I kind of roll with what they bring to me. Brings me to a patient of mine who who writes his own books, and he's been doing this for
Wow.
years, illustrates them as well.
Wow.
And so one day, his mom said, "Why don't you show Dr. Levine your books?" And there, many of them, and done over the years. So pieces of paper stapled together with illustrations and picture and writing, and he has his own. So in some ways, he reads. He read to me, right? And so some of them had just pictures, and some of them had words. And so what I had a very meaningful meeting time with him in one of our sessions where he read to me, and I said, "Who's this
Wow.
guy doing?" So I'm wondering also if there's room for creating your own book for those that have trouble kind of sitting with their others' books, right? And
Sure.
then saying, well, write our own book. And so in the spectrum world, now that we're speaking about this, I do have many that author their own stuff, and they'll make comic books or I can't remember, there's a Japanese term, I think it's manga, which is essentially a Japanese styled comic with anime characters, and so that's been big. But I just realized that some of the more interesting reading sharing times were of a child on the spectrum telling me what they had written or drawn, basically.
Oh, so that's an interesting point. So a consideration could be finding an interest and encouraging them to perhaps write a story based on this interest and reading it or something to that effect. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. And do you want maybe this book's not interesting? Maybe you want to write your own book, right?
Sure.
And read it to yeah.
No
And
doubt.
even if it's not, like I said, I do, the importance of reading is incredible, right? However, depending on their developmental level, simply reading a story, and we have many picture books that are out there that are not words and that you can read to a child in a very animated way that are still reading, but
Yeah.
not decoding, say, the words in front of you.
Oh,
So
decoding.
uh,
Okay.
I think, I think that having so leading have them lead the discussion lead and that's what you were describing too. We often do that.
Yes.
Which book do you read? And this is just saying or you want to write your own book or read to me. Love that as well.
Okay. Great. Well, Dr. Levine, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Really appreciate you taking the time out of a very busy schedule to kind of talk to myself, talk to our listeners, talk to our readers out here about working with kids with autism and just kids in general, just being a good parent and listening and
Yeah, I love
providing.
that. And I and when you told me what you were doing, Lauren, I was like, what a fantastic idea
Mhm.
to just be available to people to share an experience that you enjoy. And yeah, and it needs I think reading is a universal language for the world in some ways too. It's something that we all can engage in. So I think bringing it to whomever it is, whatever special needs is fantastic. So I'm so happy you're doing it.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Well, thank you very much. Once again, those who are listening, please make sure that you're on the YouTube, that you hit the thumbs up, that you share, and you subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you, and take care and have a good day.